We encounter ourselves again and again, beneath thousands of disguises as we journey through life. And perhaps most of us are becoming more exhausted with each passing day because of those invisible disguises. Take a moment to look back on the days you have lived. Even when nothing particularly terrible has happened in the outside world, you still go to work, still meet people, still strive to keep your life moving in the right direction. Yet, somewhere deep within, your spirit feels as though it is being pressed down by an invisible weight that is almost impossible to name. The greatest irony is that the harder we strive to become better, the more many of us feel ourselves drifting away from the natural lightness our inner being once possessed. Eventually, we arrive at a turning point in our exhaustion, where we are compelled to stop and ask ourselves whether the thing truly draining our soul lies in what we still lack, or in what we continue to hold on to. Carl Jung viewed inner life from a perspective entirely opposite to the way most people approach it today. He did not believe that inner growth begins by constantly cramming ourselves with more knowledge, more habits, or ever newer methods of self-improvement. In many cases, what weighs down the soul is not the absence of light, but the burdens we have carried for far too many years, even after they have ceased to reflect our true nature. Over time, our vital energy does not vanish because of one monumental event. Instead, it leaks away slowly and quietly through the very things we keep convincing ourselves we can never let go of. This is also the very knot that causes so many people to misunderstand the idea of vibrating at a higher level of consciousness. True transformation of consciousness has never begun by forcing ourselves to become more positive, stronger, or somehow more extraordinary than everyone else. It begins with a process that is far quieter and far more courageous, the moment when a person finally becomes honest enough to lay down the very things that have been draining their life force every single day. Today's journey into psychological understanding will take some time. I would like to invite you to set aside the noise and demands of the outside world for a while and create a space of genuine peace for yourself, so that you can stay with me until the very end of this conversation. You may wish to brew a warm cup of tea, pour yourself a rich cup of coffee to savor slowly, light a scented candle with a gentle fragrance, or simply settle into a comfortable corner by the window where you can hear the quiet voice of your own heart more clearly. Once the space around you has become still and the antenna of your soul is ready to rest in silence, we will begin exploring the 5 fundamental psychological barriers that Jung believed every human being must release if they wish to experience a deeper sense of inner lightness. It is the moment we realize how exhausted we have become from relentlessly chasing the expectations of others, or from the deeply rooted fear that keeps us running from our own darkness and solitude. Perhaps one of these 5 invisible anchors is the very thing you have been holding on to most tightly without even realizing it. And now, if you are ready to listen with a peaceful and open mind, let us begin this journey together. Part 1. The true essence of a high vibrational frequency. Modern life is creating a very particular kind of person, someone who understands more and more about psychology, yet finds it increasingly difficult to reach the true depth of their own inner world. Never before has it been so easy to access content about healing, self-development, or expanding consciousness. With just a few minutes of scrolling through a phone, people can absorb dozens of pieces of advice on protecting their energy, raising their vibration, living more positively, or becoming a higher version of themselves. Yet the paradox is this: the more spiritual and psychological content many people consume, the more they lose the ability to listen to the natural rhythm unfolding within them. Their minds become like a room where someone is always speaking. A podcast plays during the morning commute. A healing video runs while they eat dinner. A checklist of habits to improve fills the moments before sleep. Gradually, the inner life begins to be treated like a project that must be constantly upgraded. Modern people no longer know how to remain with silence for very long. The moment an inner emptiness appears, it is immediately filled with another piece of content, another philosophy, another method. Over time, they begin to mistake the endless consumption of knowledge for the genuine maturation of the soul. This was something Carl Jung recognized remarkably early. Jung never viewed inner life as an endless process of accumulation. He saw the human psyche as an ecosystem that depends upon inner coherence. A forest does not become healthier simply because people continue bringing seeds from elsewhere. If the soil beneath has already been depleted of its vitality, everything planted upon it will eventually become nothing more than another layer of disorder. Many people today are living in precisely this condition. They continue absorbing more and more, yet their inner world grows increasingly devoid of its own center of gravity. They know exactly how they are supposed to think positively, what they should let go of, and how they ought to heal. Yet the more they live, the more they feel their spirit being pulled in countless directions. Like the surface of a lake constantly disturbed by endless ripples, it eventually loses the ability to reflect anything with clarity. A person's vibrational state has never been determined by the amount of spiritual knowledge they possess. It is determined by the degree of harmony between their outer life and the deepest movement of their inner being. A person may listen to hundreds of podcasts about inner peace while continuing to live a lifestyle that steadily drains their spirit. Someone may memorize every concept of healing while losing the ability to recognize what truly allows their own soul to expand. Psychological knowledge, when it is not accompanied by authentic connection with one's inner life, can easily become a subtle form of intellectual noise. This explains why so many people, despite constantly working on themselves, continue to carry an overwhelming sense of exhaustion within. It is not the fatigue of the body after physical labor. It is the weariness that emerges when the inner self is forced to move according to a rhythm that no longer belongs to it, a rhythm that is too fast. Too many reactions, too much stimulation, too many voices entering the inner life until a person gradually loses the ability to distinguish which thoughts truly arise from within and which are merely echoes of the outside world. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Most people focus only on the word darkness in that sentence, while overlooking the more important word, conscious, awareness, seeing, recognizing. Spiritual maturity does not arise from endlessly searching for more light outside ourselves. It begins with the ability to perceive the true architecture of our inner world. What nourishes the soul? What fragments it? What allows the spirit to become lighter, and what quietly drains its vitality day after day? Brenda came to understand this after years of living in a constant state of self-improvement. She filled every empty moment of her day reading psychology books, saved hundreds of videos about healing, and always believed she was moving closer to becoming a better version of herself. Yet over time, Brenda's mind began to resemble a room crowded with too many voices. One expert's opinion overlapped with another person's philosophy. One method buried another. Eventually, she could no longer tell which emotions truly belonged to her and which thoughts were simply echoes borrowed from the outside world. Everything changed one completely ordinary evening when Brenda drove home without turning anything on. There was only the quiet hum of the engine and the long silence inside the car. Within that silence, Brenda realized for the first time just how exhausted her mind had become from constantly taking in more. In that very moment, she understood that what her inner life truly needed was not another method for living, but enough open space for her soul to return to its own natural rhythm of breathing. This is why a high vibrational frequency, from a Jungian perspective, has never meant a state of perpetual emotional excitement, nor does it have anything to do with becoming more positive than everyone else. A mature soul is not one that is forever filled with light. It is a soul that is no longer pulled away from its own center for prolonged periods of time. A boat does not sink simply because the waves are large. It sinks when the structure beneath it loses its ability to remain balanced upon the water. The human inner life is no different. Lasting heaviness rarely arises because of one single event. It develops when the psyche remains for too long in a state of fragmentation, disconnection, and separation from its own authentic rhythm. Therefore, the true essence of vibrating at a higher level of consciousness does not lie in adding more things that appear spiritual. It lies in the gradual liberation of the mind from prolonged inner noise so that it may return to a state of inner unity, a state in which thoughts, emotions, daily rhythms, and the deepest layers of the self no longer move like separate currents flowing in different directions. If, as you have listened this far, you feel that something deeply familiar within you has just been touched, perhaps that is no coincidence. There are periods in life when people remain in such a prolonged state of inner tension that they completely forget what it feels like to truly relax from within. Everything outwardly continues as usual, yet the mind seems never to have rested from its own thoughts. And perhaps the strangest realization of all is that many people only discover how weary their inner life has become after they can no longer remember the last time they genuinely felt light. So I would like to ask you one very small question. Lately, what has been weighing most heavily on your spirit? It does not have to be anything dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the feeling of having to think constantly, of having to keep holding everything together, or the feeling that it has been far too long since you have truly experienced peace within yourself. If you would like, you can leave one very short sentence beneath this video. Something like, "I've never stopped thinking," or "The most exhausting part is always pretending I'm okay," or simply, "My mind feels like it has never truly rested." Sometimes, the very moment a person finally names the state they have been living in is the moment their inner life begins to stop running from itself. Part 2. Why most people never raise their vibration. What keeps a person trapped in the same old life often has very little to do with external circumstances. More often, it lies in the quiet familiarity between their inner world and the emotional patterns that have lived within them for far too long. The human psyche rarely moves immediately toward what is truly good for the soul. Instead, it instinctively returns to whatever feels familiar first, even when that very place has already exhausted the spirit. That is why so many people, even after fully understanding what is hurting them, continue returning to the same patterns of living. It is not because they do not want to change. It is because the deepest part of them has not yet learned how to exist outside the emotional structures it has always known. A life lived in constant tension, a relationship that keeps the heart waiting, a familiar sense of anxiety. Over time, the unconscious begins to accept these conditions as the normal state of existence. Carl Jung saw this with remarkable clarity when he observed that the unconscious continually seeks to recreate the psychological structures with which a person became familiar early in life. This is also why genuine inner transformation has never been as simple as learning another method for living. The far greater challenge lies in becoming conscious enough to recognize what within us continues, quietly and persistently, to pull us back into the same old cycles. Because sometimes, the reason the inner life can never truly become lighter is not the absence of light. It is an unconscious loyalty to things that no longer belong to who we truly are. Number 1. Human beings are often addicted to what feels familiar to their wounds. Sometimes, the hardest thing to escape in human life is not suffering itself, but familiarity. A sadness repeated for long enough eventually begins to take on the shape of safety. A wound that has existed for many years gradually becomes the psychological environment a person learns to adapt to, much like eyes that eventually grow accustomed to a dimly lit room after spending too many days in the dark. That is why so many people say they want to change their lives, to step into a way of living that feels lighter, deeper, and more peaceful, yet they continually return to the very things that leave their spirit exhausted. They walk away from a relationship that caused them pain, only to find themselves drawn a few months later to someone remarkably similar. They try to escape a lifestyle that has drained their inner vitality, only to rebuild an almost identical routine. Some people even emerge from a period of crisis, only to rush towards something else to fill the emptiness, as though too much peace makes them more uneasy than chaos ever could. From the outside, these choices often appear irrational. Yet from Carl Jung's perspective, human beings are not guided solely by what makes them happy. They are also drawn back to whatever feels familiar to the unconscious. This is one of the deepest mechanisms of the human psyche, one Jung returned to repeatedly. The unconscious continually seeks to recreate the emotional structures with which it has become familiar, even when those very structures have caused suffering. A person raised in an emotionally cold environment does not unconsciously search for peace. Instead, they search for what feels familiar. And sometimes those two things are entirely different. Some souls have lived for so long believing they must earn love that genuine tenderness leaves them feeling strangely disoriented. They no longer know how to exist within a relationship that does not require constant self-protection. They have grown accustomed to waiting, to uncertainty, to endlessly trying to read another person's mind. As a result, when they encounter someone whose presence is stable and peaceful, something inside them feels as though it is missing. What they miss is not drama. What they miss is the familiar sensation of an old wound that has yet to appear. People often believe they make their choices consciously, yet many of their decisions arise from far deeper layers of the psyche. Someone says they long for peace, yet they repeatedly find themselves drawn toward environments that keep their spirit under constant tension. Someone longs to be cherished, yet continually softens toward those who offer only uncertainty. Someone says they wish to slow down, yet cannot tolerate a single day without fresh stimulation. These contradictions are not signs of weakness. They exist because the unconscious naturally pulls a person back toward whatever feels psychologically consistent with what they have always known. It is much like someone who has lived beside a railway for so many years that they eventually fall asleep to the nightly rumble of passing trains. When they finally move somewhere completely silent, it is the silence itself that keeps them awake. The human psyche works in much the same way. An inner world accustomed to anxiety rarely trusts peace immediately. A mind shaped by the fear of abandonment unconsciously recreates situations in which that fear can be experienced again, not because it desires suffering, but because the deepest part of the self has not yet learned how to exist outside its old emotional architecture. This is why raising one's vibrational frequency can never be reduced to changing a few surface habits. A person may meditate every morning, listen to healing podcasts every evening, and read dozens of books on personal growth. Yet if the unconscious remains addicted to emotions that feel familiar to old wounds, the entire inner life will inevitably be pulled backward. It is like a boat trying to sail forward while quietly dropping its anchor into the ocean floor. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." As long as people remain unable to see their own unconscious, it will continue directing their lives from the shadows, and they will mistake its influence for destiny. This is what many fail to recognize when speaking about energy and vibration. They believe they are somehow attracting the same kinds of suffering from the outside world, when in reality, it is often their own unhealed inner world that continues opening the door for the same old patterns to return. There was once a woman who spent years in relationships where she was always the one waiting for a message, waiting for an explanation, waiting for clarity that never truly arrived. She insisted she hated the constant uncertainty. Yet every time she met someone emotionally stable and straightforward, her feelings quickly faded. Only much later did she realize that what attracted her was never love itself. It was the familiar feeling of insecurity that had taken root in her psyche long before she was old enough to understand it. This is perhaps the most unsettling consequence of wounds that have never been brought into consciousness. They cause us to confuse what is familiar with what truly belongs to us. That is why so many people never enter a lighter way of living, not because they have failed to try hard enough, but because a deeper part of them remains loyal to outdated emotional structures. As long as the unconscious continues to regard familiar suffering as a place of safety, people will keep returning to whatever burdens their spirit, no matter how strongly their conscious mind insists that it wants to change. True psychological growth begins the moment a person no longer asks only, "What makes me happy?" but instead begins asking, "Why am I always drawn back to the same kind of suffering?" That single question opens the doorway into the deepest regions of the unconscious, where the repeating patterns of the inner life have been quietly taking shape, long before we became mature enough to recognize them. Yet the journey of breaking free from these inner anchors is already difficult enough. It becomes even more challenging when we realize that the unconscious cocoon surrounding each individual does not exist in isolation. It is constantly colliding with, absorbing, and being shaped by a far greater ocean of unconscious forces surrounding it. Sometimes people fail to raise their vibrational frequency, not only because they are endlessly trying to heal the wounds hidden within themselves, but because they overlook one profound truth. Their anchor is being held firmly in place by the powerful current of a much larger river. Before we have fully understood the hidden conflicts within our own psyche, we have already entered another battle without realizing it. A battle against the invisible pull of society's vast web. Unconscious identification with the low-frequency system of the crowd. Number 2. Unconscious identification with the crowd's low-frequency system. Modern people often deceive themselves with the illusion of independence. We believe that the thoughts in our minds belong solely to us, that the sorrow in our hearts is entirely self-generated, and that the home we inhabit is an untouchable island. But have you ever wondered why, after a day of doing nothing physically demanding, after merely scrolling through your phone or spending time around a few people, you can feel exhausted to the very marrow of your bones? The truth is that your being has never been an isolated island in the middle of the ocean. Through Carl Jung's profound perspective, each of us is, in reality, an extraordinarily sensitive antenna, constantly receiving and transmitting signals within a shared psychic atmosphere of humanity that he called the collective unconscious. Sometimes you cannot raise your vibrational frequency, not because you lack discipline or aspiration, but because your antenna has become submerged and manipulated by an invisible yet relentless force. Unconscious identification with the energetic field of the crowd. Imagine that, at the beginning of your awakening journey, your energy is like a crystal-clear spring emerging from a mountain crevice. It longs to flow freely, to cleanse itself of all impurities, and to merge with the pure current of the universe. Yet the moment it enters ordinary life, that stream is immediately thrown into the industrial grinder of modern society. Think about your own morning. The first thing that awakens your mind is rarely the sound of birdsong or the warmth of sunlight. Instead, it is the relentless ringing of alarms, headlines saturated with anxiety, and social media algorithms infused with envy, judgment, and comparison. This system functions like a factory mass producing low-frequency states. It implants within us an invisible fear of falling behind, romanticizes the relentless pressure of survival under the name of career success, and above all, reinforces the victim mentality of the masses, where blaming fate is far more common than accepting personal responsibility. Every time you scroll through hateful comments, the antenna of your mind unconsciously locks onto that negative frequency. Carl Jung offered a powerful warning about the destructive force of this collective phenomenon. In 1946, after emerging from the ruins of the Second World War and witnessing humanity's overwhelming chaos and despair, Jung delivered a moving BBC radio address. The speech was later preserved in his essay, The Fight with the Shadow, included in Civilization in Transition, where he warned of the crowd's systemic destructive power. The giant factors which today determine the life of mankind are of a psychic nature. We are filled with anxiety, with a neurotic restlessness, because the collective psyche has become unstable and dangerous. The collective anxiety Jung described is precisely the dense energetic fog that suffocates us each day. When the entire environment surrounding you has become psychologically contaminated, it is impossible to maintain a clear and elevated frequency while your roots of perception remain deeply embedded in the soil of the crowd. This process unfolds according to a remarkably natural principle: entrainment. Imagine several pendulum clocks hanging side by side on the same wall. No matter how differently they swing at first, given enough time, the smaller and weaker pendulums gradually synchronize themselves with the rhythm of the largest and strongest one. Our minds operate in much the same way. You may spend an hour each morning meditating, reading, or lifting your inner state into peace and clarity. Yet moments later, you step into an office filled with sighs, gossip, and quiet resentment, or return home to a relationship steeped in emotional toxicity. No argument needs to occur. Simply remaining within that atmosphere is enough for your frequency to be silently pulled downward until it matches the energetic climate of the room. This entrapment occurs because most of us lack an inner filter capable of protecting our minds. We leave the doors of our inner world wide open, allowing the psychological debris of the outside world to flood in unchecked. Consider FOMO, one of the defining afflictions of our age. A person may begin perfectly content with their life, only to feel inadequate, anxious, and unsuccessful after 15 minutes of watching carefully curated images of other people's seemingly perfect lives. Their inner peace immediately begins to leak away, consumed by the collective currents of envy and endless craving. It is like trying to bail water out of a boat with a hole in its hull. You devote yourself to discovering methods for raising your vibration while continuing to allow the polluted waters of the collective to pour through the cracks left by unconscious living. Even more dangerous is the fact that this unconscious identification offers a false sense of security. The crowd always prefers companionship in suffering over solitude in awakening. The moment you begin vibrating at a higher frequency, learning to love without conditions, to forgive with sincerity, and to see life with genuine clarity, you suddenly become out of sync with those around you. Without fully realizing it, people begin to feel threatened by your peace. They attempt to pull you back into the old emotional valley through criticism, mockery, or by dismissing you as strange or unrealistic. At the deepest level, every human being longs to belong to a tribe. And to avoid rejection, many willingly compromise by lowering their own frequency in exchange for acceptance. We would rather worry together, complain together, and remain trapped within familiar suffering than summon the courage to stand alone upon the summit of awakening. For this reason, the inability to raise one's vibration is not merely the result of unhealed personal wounds. It is a silent battle between a soul longing for freedom and an immense system of psychological manipulation. As long as we consume toxic information without discernment, remain attached to relationships that survive only by draining one another's energy, and allow public opinion to determine our worth, we remain nothing more than energetic puppets whose strings are pulled by unseen hands. To reach higher levels of consciousness, what must be abandoned is not merely a handful of bad habits, but the courage to sever the distorted frequencies of the crowd and return the antenna of the soul to the pure song of the authentic self within. Yet once you have recognized the manipulation of the crowd, once your inner antenna has found the courage to turn away from the endless noise outside and begin its return to silence, you encounter one final obstacle. This time, it is neither an external force nor merely an old wound carried from the past. It is a loyal yet stubborn guardian standing at the very gateway of awakening, an entity that we ourselves have carefully nurtured in order to define who we are before the world. In truth, the evolution of consciousness can remain stalled at its very beginning unless we are willing to confront one of nature's most uncompromising laws. No rebirth has ever taken place without first passing through a death. To ascend into a new level of being, the old must yield its place. And that is the moment we enter the most difficult battle of all, the battle with ourselves, the ego's enduring fear of the dissolution required for genuine transformation. Number 3. The ego always fears the dissolution that transformation requires. Most people are not truly afraid of suffering. What they fear even more is the kind of change that demands they leave behind the familiar version of themselves. That is why so many can endure a life that slowly drains their spirit for years, yet panic at the mere thought of moving in a different direction. They remain in a job that has long since lost its vitality. They hold on to a relationship that lost its connection long ago. They repeat the same rhythm of life day after day, even though it leaves their inner world dry and depleted. It is not because human beings love what causes them pain. It is because the human psyche naturally clings to what is familiar, even when that familiarity is quietly causing the soul to wither. This is the profound paradox of the ego. The ego does not exist to guide us toward wholeness. Its primary function is to preserve a continuous and stable sense of identity. As long as a particular psychological structure feels familiar enough, the ego will fight to preserve it, even after it has stopped nourishing the inner life. That is why so many people say they want to change, to live more lightly, to move into a higher level of consciousness, while deep within, they are still trying to preserve almost every foundation of their old life. They long for peace, but refuse to release the very things that keep their inner world restless. They desire freedom, but fear losing the patterns that once made them feel safe. They wish to mature, yet unconsciously resist every disruption capable of dissolving the old image they hold of themselves. And so the psyche enters a remarkable state. It yearns for transformation while simultaneously resisting that very transformation. Carl Jung observed that many psychological crises are not signs of collapse at all. Rather, they are signs that the old psychic structure is no longer capable of containing the new self that is struggling to emerge. Yet, what makes this process so painful is that the ego interprets every form of dissolution as a threat. A caterpillar can never become a butterfly if it insists on preserving its old form inside the cocoon. Yet human beings often want to step into a new life without surrendering anything that belongs to the old one. They want healing without passing through solitude. They want maturity without abandoning the habits that keep their spirits stagnant. They want to awaken into a higher level of awareness while continuing to think, live, and depend upon the same familiar patterns that shaped their former existence. This is why so many people remain stuck for years. It is not necessarily because they lack the ability to change. It is because their entire psychological system is working tirelessly to protect familiarity at any cost. The ego would rather remain imprisoned within familiar suffering than venture into an unfamiliar life it does not yet know how to control. Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. No awakening of consciousness occurs without passing through pain." But the pain Jung speaks of is not limited to emotional wounds. It also includes the profound disorientation that arises when the old version of oneself no longer fits. It is a strange, suspended state that is difficult to describe, like standing halfway across a bridge, lost in fog. The road behind can no longer be retraced, yet the road ahead remains hidden from view. This is the stage at which many people unconsciously return to their old lives. Not because the old life is better, but because it is more familiar. Some people begin changing only to return almost immediately to the very relationships that once exhausted them. Others glimpse a new sense of inner freedom, only to rush to fill that open space with work, noise, or the familiar distractions they have always relied upon. The emptiness that appears during transformation often provokes intense anxiety within the ego. It feels like watching an old house being demolished while the new one has not yet been completed. During this uncertain period, the human psyche instinctively reaches back toward whatever once created a sense of stability. A woman named Elena experienced precisely this after deciding to leave the environment where she had lived for nearly 10 years. Before making that decision, she believed all she needed was another healing method or a long vacation to restore her energy. Yet once she truly stepped away from her old rhythm of life, Elena realized that what had exhausted her was not merely the pressure of work. It was the entire identity she had sustained for almost a decade. During the first months after making that change, she constantly wanted to return to her former life, even though it had nearly drained her completely. Not because she had been happy there, but because the ego always feels safer inside a familiar cage than beneath a sky it has not yet learned how to navigate. This is where many people misunderstand what it means to raise one's vibrational frequency. They imagine transformation as a process of adding more positive things to their lives. Yet, from a Jungian perspective, genuine transformation almost always begins with dissolution, the dissolution of inner structures that have outlived their purpose, the dissolution of ways of being that no longer correspond to the deepest truth of the soul. And it is precisely this process that terrifies the ego, because it forces a person into a state where they are no longer entirely their old self, yet have not fully become their new one. A forest after a great fire appears from the outside to be nothing but destruction, yet nature never regards it as an ending. Many seeds can only germinate after the old vegetation has been burned away. The human psyche follows the same principle. Certain levels of consciousness cannot emerge until the old structures have dissolved enough to make space for them. That is why most people never truly enter a different way of living, not because they lack the desire to change, but because the ego relentlessly struggles to preserve the familiar shape of life, even after the soul has been signaling for a very long time that it is meant to move in an entirely different direction. This is also what makes genuine inner growth so profoundly difficult. It does not merely require us to learn something new. It demands the courage to lose a part of who we once believed ourselves to be. These movements of the psyche are often difficult to recognize when they exist only as abstract theory. Yet in real life, they reveal themselves far more clearly through the subtle ways a person gradually drifts away from their authentic self without even noticing. And sometimes by simply observing an ordinary life, we come to understand that spiritual exhaustion does not always arise from great tragedy. More often, it is created by hundreds of small compromises, repeated quietly for far too long. Part 3. Anna's story. Anna moved to Seattle in early November, just as the city was entering its longest rainy season of the year. Mornings there always arrived slowly. The sun rose late behind a blanket of gray clouds covering the bay, while the steep streets leading down to the harbor were forever scented with damp timber and freshly roasted coffee. Her new apartment was above an old flower shop near Fremont, on the third floor of a weathered brown brick building. Inside, there was almost nothing except an old armchair, a few boxes of books she had not yet unpacked, and a small olive tree beside the window. The tree was nearly dead. Its leaves had curled at the edges, and the soil had hardened as though it had gone untended for a very long time. Anna kept it anyway. 3 years earlier, she had never imagined she would one day be living alone in a place like this. Back then, she was still in San Diego, working as a brand strategist for a major cosmetics company. From the outside, Anna's life matched almost perfectly the familiar image of a successful, accomplished woman. A good career, a stable relationship, thoughtful friends, weekend brunches by the ocean, and a few healing retreats every year. Her Instagram was filled with California sunshine, early morning yoga, psychology books, and captions about learning to slow down in the modern world. Everything looked beautiful. Yet as time went on, Anna increasingly felt that her life resembled a room arranged so meticulously that there was no longer any space left for fresh air to flow through. She first noticed it in the smallest moments, reaching for her phone the instant she opened her eyes each morning, driving along the coastline without remembering a single stretch of the road, because her mind was completely occupied by another self-improvement podcast playing through her headphones. Having dinner with Daniel, where every silence between them always had to be filled by the television or by conversations that stretched late into the night. Daniel was not a bad man, quite the opposite. He was the kind of man who made people feel safe the moment they met him. Calm, courteous, thoughtful, and always determined to solve everything through reason. Yet the longer Anna stayed in that relationship, the more she felt herself being forced into a frame that had been built far too tightly around her. Daniel loved crowded places. Anna never really did, yet she went anyway. Daniel disliked prolonged silence at home, so the television was almost always on. Daniel believed every emotion should be expressed immediately, while Anna often preferred to keep hers to herself a little longer until she found the right words. Eventually, she forgot that this had once been one of her deepest needs. People rarely lose themselves through one great catastrophe. More often, it happens through countless tiny adjustments repeated over many years. One night near the end of summer, Anna woke up around 3 in the morning, thirsty. Daniel was sleeping soundly beside her. She walked downstairs for a glass of water, then stood for quite some time at the kitchen window looking down at the parking lot below. The city was so quiet that she could even hear the automatic sprinklers running somewhere outside. It was in that completely ordinary moment that Anna suddenly realized it had been a very long time since her mind had truly rested. That realization stayed with her for months afterward, like a quiet ache she could never quite name. It was not powerful enough to destroy her life overnight, but it was enough to cast a faint layer of unfamiliarity over everything that had once felt ordinary. During that period, Anna often stopped by a small cafe near the harbor after work. It was never as crowded as the other cafes in the city. Most of its customers were locals who had known one another for years. Anna always chose the table beside the back window, where she could see the water whenever the skies cleared. And almost every week, she saw Evelyn there. Evelyn was in her 70s. Before retiring, she had been a professor of art history in Portland. The barista once told Anna that Evelyn's husband had passed away nearly 10 years earlier, after which she had moved to live alone near the sea. She had a habit of reading for hours without ever touching her phone. Occasionally, she exchanged a few quiet words with someone nearby before returning to her book and the half-cold cup of tea resting beside the window. At first, Anna hardly noticed her. Then, one rainy afternoon near the end of November, she found herself unconsciously opening her work laptop, scrolling through her phone, and listening to a podcast about raising your vibration, all at the same time, as though her mind could no longer tolerate even the smallest moment of emptiness. When the waiter placed her coffee on the table, Anna suddenly realized Evelyn was watching her through the fogged window. Evelyn said nothing at first. She simply slipped a bookmark into the middle of her book and gently rotated her teacup until the loose leaves settled at the bottom. Outside, the rain continued to pour. Pedestrians pulled up their collars and hurried through puddles reflecting the golden glow of streetlights. Inside, the hum of the espresso machine blended with the tapping of keyboards into one steady, familiar rhythm. Evelyn looked at Anna's laptop screen, crowded with overlapping windows, and asked softly, "Have you noticed that these days people talk more and more about healing, yet somehow seem less and less able to sit quietly with themselves?" Anna's hands froze above the keyboard for a few seconds. Evelyn said nothing more. She simply lowered her eyes and reopened her book, as though the thought had merely drifted across her mind. That night, Anna returned home very late. Daniel was already asleep. The television was still on in the living room because he always liked to have something playing before bed. Anna stood alone in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner, and suddenly realized that her mind had been living inside noise for far too long. She began noticing that she was almost never truly alone anymore. If she was not talking to someone, she listened to podcasts. If she was not listening to podcasts, she turned on music. If she was not listening to music, she scrolled through her phone. Anna's mind had become like a room whose front door had been left open for years, allowing every sound from the outside world to wander in. A few months later, she resigned from her job. Daniel thought she was simply going through a crisis of turning 30. Her mother cried over the phone when she learned that Anna wanted to move to Seattle without any concrete plan. Only Anna understood that she was not leaving because she hated her old life. She simply could no longer continue living with the growing feeling that her inner world had become a stranger to itself. The first months in Seattle were nothing like the romantic stories people tell about finding yourself. The city was cold. The rain seemed endless. Anna worked part-time in a small bookstore to pay the rent. There were evenings when she sat alone in her dark apartment, eating instant noodles and wondering whether she had just ruined her entire life. But little by little, something began to change. She slept more deeply. She walked without wearing headphones. She sat for hours beside the harbor, watching the water change color beneath the evening sky, without feeling the need to capture the moment for anyone else to see. There were days when the only people she spoke to were the owner of the bookstore and the man selling bread on the street corner. Yet her mind felt lighter than it had in years. That spring, the old olive tree beside the window began to grow new leaves. One morning, while watering it, Anna suddenly realized that it had been a very long time since she had last wondered who she needed to become. Outside the window, Seattle's rain continued falling softly over the old rooftops, stretching down toward the harbor. And for the first time in many years, the life within her began moving once again, according to its own natural rhythm. Perhaps what makes Anna's story resonate with so many people is not the dramatic events of her life. It is the deeply familiar feeling that countless people in the modern world quietly carry every day. The feeling that everything on the outside appears perfectly fine, while the inner world slowly becomes unfamiliar to itself. They keep working. They continue showing up for everyone around them. They move through each day as though nothing has happened. Yet with every passing year, they feel more and more as though their inner life has forgotten how to breathe in its own natural rhythm. If you would like conversations like this to continue appearing here on YouTube, please consider giving this video a like. It genuinely helps content exploring Carl Jung's psychology reach those who may be silently experiencing these same feelings without ever having found the words to describe them. And if you would like to continue exploring the unconscious, the hidden movements of the soul, and the journey back to your authentic self, you are warmly invited to subscribe and join us in the videos ahead. Perhaps amid all the noise of the modern world, this little corner can become a quiet enough place for us to slow down and simply be with ourselves for a while. Perhaps what Anna truly lost throughout those years was neither time nor some earlier version of herself. What disappeared was something far quieter, the feeling of allowing her inner life to exist according to its own natural rhythm. And that is precisely what so many people only come to recognize after spending far too long living with a spirit constantly pulled away from its own center by things that once seemed harmless. The older we grow, the more we come to understand that unless we learn to let certain things go, the inner world can never become truly light again. And you know, Elena's story is not an isolated fragment. It reflects the shared journey of countless exhausted souls searching for their way, leading us into the most important part of today's discussion: the 5 things you must let go of right now if you truly wish to raise your vibrational frequency. In the next part, we will carefully unravel each invisible psychological anchor, each silent habit that has been draining your life force day after day, so we can discover what has truly been holding your soul beneath the heavy fog of exhaustion. Part 4. 5 things you must let go of right now to vibrate at a higher frequency. The inner life rarely becomes heavy because of a single dramatic event. Most of the time, that weight is created by the things we carry for far too long, even though our inner world has long since outgrown them. A way of living that constantly seeks approval, a need to rescue other people in order to feel worthy, a hope that has already died, yet the ego refuses to release it, or the fear of being alone, so overwhelming that a person chooses to remain in places where their soul continues to shrink. What makes these things so difficult to let go has never been the things themselves. It is that, over time, people begin building their very sense of existence around them without even realizing it. Some no longer know who they are unless they are constantly needed. Some no longer feel safe unless they are living inside other people's attention. And there are those who have lived with an inner world stretched so tightly for so long that genuine peace itself begins to feel unfamiliar. Carl Jung understood clearly that psychological transformation never begins by forcing yourself to become someone else. It begins the moment you become honest enough to recognize what within you has reached the time to be released. Not because those things are bad, but because they have kept your inner life trapped inside an old psychological structure for far too long. And it is here that the journey toward a higher way of being enters its most difficult stage. It is no longer about learning something new. It is about becoming aware enough to recognize what has been quietly draining your soul's vitality every single day. Number 1. The need to be liked by everyone. One of the most subtle prisons people ever lock themselves inside is neither poverty, failure, nor loneliness. It is the need to be liked by everyone. At first glance, it sounds like a perfectly ordinary desire. Everyone wants to be accepted, appreciated, and to feel that they belong somewhere in this world. Yet this seemingly harmless need quietly becomes one of the greatest drains on a person's psychological energy. For the moment, someone begins placing their inner peace in the hands of other people's reactions. Their soul almost completely loses its natural way of living. They begin watching the expressions on other people's faces more closely than they observe their own emotions. A delayed text message becomes enough to unsettle the mind. A slight hint of coldness from someone else can make the entire day feel heavy. An offhand remark can remain lodged in the mind like a splinter beneath the skin. Over time, people gradually lose their own inner center and begin existing like a compass that constantly turns toward the emotional magnetic field of everyone around them. What is remarkable is that most people never realize they are living this way. The need to be liked rarely appears in an obvious form. More often, it hides behind qualities society openly praises: excessive kindness, the ability to make everyone feel comfortable, the habit of constantly giving in, the talent for adapting to every environment. Outwardly, these people appear warm and easy to be around. Yet beneath the surface, their inner life remains caught in a state of quiet, continuous tension, like the string of a violin pulled so tightly for so long that even silence never allows it to truly relax. Carl Jung understood this clearly when he spoke about the persona, the psychological mask we create in order to adapt to society. Jung never considered the persona to be something inherently bad. No one can live entirely separated from social life. But the tragedy begins when people completely identify themselves with the version of themselves that receives the greatest acceptance. From that moment on, they no longer live from their true inner center. Instead, they live from the reflections constantly returned to them by the outside world. That is why so many people, despite being well-liked, remain deeply exhausted. This exhaustion is not the kind that follows physical labor. It is the fatigue of constantly trying to keep the emotional atmosphere around them comfortable, always thinking before speaking, always calculating how someone else might feel, always trying to avoid becoming the reason another person feels disappointed or uncomfortable. Gradually, the mind becomes like a room filled with cautious footsteps. There is no longer enough space for genuine spontaneity to exist. A woman named Clara spent almost her entire youth living this way. To her friends, Clara was the kind of person everyone wanted around: thoughtful, attentive, and almost incapable of refusing anyone. Yet the older she became, the more she felt like a house whose doors were always open for everyone else, while never truly belonging to herself. Clara could spend hours helping other people process their emotions, yet it took her an incredibly long time to admit one very simple truth. She was exhausted from always having to be the agreeable one. The moment that changed Clara's life did not come through any dramatic event. It happened one evening when she declined an invitation, despite having no particular reason other than the fact that she had simply run out of energy. After sending the message, Clara sat quietly with an unexpected sense of guilt, as though merely failing to meet someone else's expectations was enough to make her a bad person. For the first time, she realized she had lived for far too long in fear of disappointing other people, until she had forgotten what it actually felt like to be honest with herself. This is where so many people remain trapped for years without ever realizing it. They believe they are simply being kind. Yet beneath the surface, many of their actions are actually driven by the fear of rejection. They cannot say no, not because they genuinely want to say yes, but because they fear losing connection. They preserve harmony, not because they are inwardly peaceful, but because they fear being judged as difficult. They maintain conversations that leave them emotionally drained simply because they cannot bear the thought that someone might stop liking them. Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." This statement is often interpreted within the context of family, but on a deeper level, it reveals a profound psychological truth. People often learn to survive by reading the needs of others long before they ever understand the needs of their own soul. When that pattern continues for too long, the inner life gradually loses its ability to stand on its own. A soul that constantly needs to be liked will never become truly free. It must continuously reshape itself to fit every environment it enters, like water taking the form of whatever vessel contains it. At first, this ability creates the feeling of harmony. But as time passes, people find it increasingly difficult to remember what their true shape looks like when no one else is around. This is why the need to be liked quietly lowers a person's state of being. It keeps the inner world permanently on alert, always reacting, always scanning, always afraid of losing external approval. A mind like this struggles to experience deep inner stillness because almost all of its psychological energy is spent maintaining its connection with the outside world. And here lies the paradox. The more psychologically mature a person becomes, the more they accept that there will always be people who misunderstand them, dislike them, or eventually walk away. That maturity does not make them cold. It simply means they no longer place the entire value of their existence inside someone else's feelings. Because in the end, a soul becomes truly light only when it no longer has to keep changing its shape simply to remain accepted in the eyes of the world. Many people grow up believing they must become pleasant enough to deserve a place in someone else's life. They become more accustomed to enduring than refusing, more accustomed to preserving harmony than speaking honestly about their own feelings, more accustomed to placing other people's comfort ahead of their own inner life. And some have lived this way for so long that they no longer remember what it feels like simply to exist naturally. So I want to ask you something very simple. Do you ever find it incredibly difficult to say no? Do you struggle to disappoint someone else, even when you have been exhausted for a long time already? If you would like to, you can leave a short comment below this video. Something like, "I'm always afraid of hurting other people's feelings," or "I'm more used to enduring than refusing," or simply, "I've never really known how to put myself first." Sometimes, simply discovering that someone else shares the same feeling is enough to make the heart feel a little lighter. But the need to be liked is only the outermost layer of inner fragmentation. Because even after a person no longer lives entirely for the approval of others, they can still be pulled downward by something much deeper, the silent battle against the shadow within themselves. And sometimes, what weighs the soul down the most is not what comes from the outside world at all. It is the enormous amount of energy required to keep rejecting who we truly are. Number 2. Avoiding the darkness within. Not everything that causes human suffering comes from the outside world. Many of the disturbances that unsettle our inner lives actually begin with a silent conflict between a person and the parts of themselves they refuse to see. A faint sense of envy concealed beneath an appearance of kindness. Anger that has never been acknowledged because one has always felt compelled to appear composed. A deep emotional wound hidden beneath the mask of rationality. Over time, these suppressed emotions do not disappear. They simply retreat into the darkness of the mind, where they continue to exist like underground streams. This is what Carl Jung called the shadow. It is not merely the evil part of ourselves in a moral sense. Rather, it is everything we refuse to identify as part of who we are. desires we reject, emotions that make us feel ashamed, thoughts that do not fit the image we wish to maintain before the world. The shadow rarely reveals itself in dramatic ways. Instead, it quietly enters everyday life through ordinary reactions. An irrational irritation towards someone, a bitter feeling when witnessing another person's success, an excessive need for control, or a lingering sadness whose origin we ourselves cannot explain. Most people in the modern world are taught how to become better, yet very few are ever taught how to look directly into the darkness within themselves without immediately denying it. They learn how to behave properly. They learn to say the right things. They learn to maintain a positive image. Yet the more they mature, the more unfamiliar they become with their own inner world. It is like a city at night, where only the main boulevards remain illuminated, while every narrow alley hidden behind them has been left in silence for far too long. That is why Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Until a person becomes aware of the unconscious within, it will continue directing the course of their life, and they will mistake its influence for destiny. This statement reaches the very essence of the shadow. The shadow is not dangerous simply because it exists. What makes it dangerous is that people spend their lives pretending it is not there. A person who believes they are completely selfless is often the one who struggles most to accept the discovery of selfishness within themselves. Someone obsessed with always being right often carries an immense fear of the chaos hidden inside. A person who constantly presents themselves as calm may in fact be suppressing enormous amounts of anger that have never been allowed to surface. And the more these hidden aspects are denied, the more they find distorted ways to return. The human psyche functions much like an old house. Rooms that have remained locked for years do not disappear from the structure. They simply become darker, damper, and gradually begin to affect the atmosphere of the entire house. The shadow operates in exactly the same way. An emotion that is never acknowledged does not remain still. It simply finds another route. A denied emotional wound may harden into emotional coldness. Envy left unconscious may become a habit of belittling others. A fear of abandonment that is never confronted may transform into an overwhelming need to control relationships. This is why so many people never succeed in entering a lighter way of living. They try to elevate their spirit by adding beautiful things to their lives, yet they never dare to touch the darkness that quietly weighs down their inner world each day. They long for peace, yet have never truly sat with the anger inside themselves. They wish to live more lightly, yet continue denying wounds that have never even been given a name. They aspire to become a higher version of themselves, yet lack the courage to look directly at the deeply human, imperfect, and vulnerable parts of who they already are. In ancient mythology, the labyrinth often appears as a symbol of the descent into the unconscious. What makes the labyrinth frightening is not its darkness. It is the fact that no one entering it knows what awaits at its center. The shadow functions in much the same way. People do not fear looking into their own darkness because the shadow itself is too terrifying. They fear it because they are afraid the image they hold of themselves will never be the same after they truly see it. A woman named Marianne spent many years believing she simply could not stand hypocrisy. Yet after a period of therapy, she realized that what truly unsettled her was not other people's insincerity, but the envy she felt whenever she saw someone confidently expressing themselves in ways she had never dared to. What Marianne hated in others was, in reality, the very part of herself she had spent years suppressing. And the moment she recognized that truth, she experienced both profound pain and an equally profound sense of relief. For the first time in many years, she stopped viewing life entirely through the lens of judgment and began seeing it instead as a mirror reflecting the unconscious movements within herself. This is where genuine inner transformation truly begins. Not when a person becomes more perfect, but when they become mature enough to stop running from themselves. A forest does not become vibrant through sunlight alone. It is the dark soil beneath that quietly nourishes every form of life. The human psyche follows the same principle. The deepest layers of psychological growth are not formed through the parts of ourselves we wish to display before the world, but through our willingness to descend into the regions of our inner life we have avoided the longest. Therefore, if we truly wish to enter a higher state of vibration, we cannot spend our lives pursuing only the light. We must learn to walk through our own darkness without turning away. For the soul becomes genuinely lighter only when it no longer has to spend so much energy denying the parts of itself that have always existed within. When a person no longer has the strength to keep running from the darkness inside, they often begin searching for their sense of worth somewhere else. Many people enter relationships believing they are simply seeking love. Yet beneath that desire, they are quietly trying to heal themselves by becoming someone else's savior. And from that very moment, their psychological energy begins to leak away in ways they scarcely notice. Number 3. Wanting to save everyone in your relationships drains your psychological energy. Not every form of exhaustion within relationships begins with conflict. Some of the most dangerous forms of emotional depletion emerge within relationships that appear, on the surface, to be remarkably kind. A person who is always willing to listen, always present, always trying to understand, always becoming the one others turn to whenever they fall apart. Over time, they gradually come to be seen as a kind of emotional refuge in other people's lives. Yet what few people notice is that individuals like this often carry within themselves a profound weariness that even they struggle to put into words. This exhaustion does not arrive all at once. It is like a tiny leak beneath the floorboards of a house. At first, almost no one notices it. They continue giving, continue listening, continue trying to rescue other people's emotions through patience and kindness. Then one day, they suddenly realize that their inner world has been running on empty for a very long time, even though no major crisis has ever occurred. This is precisely what Carl Jung recognized when he spoke of the wounded healer archetype, the healer who carries within themselves a wound that has never truly healed. Jung understood that many people do not step into the role of the rescuer because they are stronger than everyone else. Rather, deep within, they are trying to discover their own sense of worth by becoming indispensable in someone else's life. That is why they find it difficult to remain still when they see another person suffering. They immediately want to help. They want to pull the other person out of the darkness. They want to become the one who understands what no one else understands. As they grow older, this role becomes so deeply woven into their identity that they themselves can no longer distinguish genuine compassion from the unconscious need to feel meaningful in the eyes of others. The danger lies here. People who carry a rescuer mentality rarely recognize the limits of their own energy. They immerse themselves too deeply in other people's emotions. They carry stories that do not belong to them for days at a time. They spend endless hours thinking about the people they want to save, They search for the perfect words to comfort them, the perfect method to heal them, the perfect moment to remain by their side. And throughout that process, their psychological energy quietly begins to leak away. One woman once shared that she always felt responsible for the emotions of everyone around her. Whenever her partner was unhappy, she immediately wondered what she had done wrong. Whenever her friends fell apart emotionally, she felt it was her responsibility to help them recover. Whenever tension arose within her family, she found herself unable to rest until everything had returned to normal. For many years, she believed this was empathy. What she failed to recognize was that her inner world had become accustomed to existing in a constant state of emotional vigilance over everyone else. A mind that lives in such a state for too long gradually loses its ability to experience genuine rest. This is why the more some people try to heal others, the more drained they themselves become. They are not merely giving their time or attention. They are using their own psychological vitality in an attempt to keep someone else from sinking. It is like someone diving into the water to save everyone without ever asking whether they still have enough strength left to swim. Jung once wrote, "Only the wounded physician heals. Only the wounded healer can truly heal." Yet Jung never meant that a person must sacrifice themselves in order to become the world's savior. His insight reaches much deeper than that. Most people's desire to rescue others grows out of unrecognized inner deficiencies that remain unconscious within the rescuer themselves. Many people cannot bear the feeling of no longer being needed. They become anxious when they are no longer the person others turn to. They feel empty when there is no one left to worry about or repair. Gradually, the unconscious begins attaching their sense of worth to always helping, always healing, always rescuing someone from their own life. But here lies the truth. No one can truly live another person's journey of psychological growth for them. A seed cannot be pulled into maturity by hand. A young bird cannot learn to fly if it is kept too long within someone else's palms. The human psyche follows the same principle. Some forms of suffering must be experienced by the individual themselves. Some lessons cannot be removed from another person's journey of growth. And the more deeply we interfere with someone else's psychological process, the more easily we lose the center of our own life. Much of the emotional exhaustion people experience in relationships does not come from loving too much. It comes from continually carrying burdens that were never their psychological responsibility in the first place. They try to become everyone's source of strength, while forgetting that even the strongest pillar will eventually crack from within if it is forced to bear too much weight. The saddest part is that people with a rescuer mentality are often praised by society. They are seen as thoughtful, kind, and deeply compassionate. Yet very few people ever see the hidden price of living this way. An inner world that remains permanently open to everyone else's emotions eventually becomes like a house with no doors. Anyone may enter. Anyone may leave their sorrow behind. And over time, the owner of that house gradually loses the ability to distinguish which emotions are truly their own and which have simply been absorbed from the world around them. That is why one of the most important steps toward raising your state of being is not learning how to give more. It is learning to recognize the boundary between genuine compassion and losing yourself within another person's emotional life. Kindness itself does not exhaust people. What exhausts them is trying to become responsible for wounds that, deep down, they never truly had the right to heal on someone else's behalf. What leaves people exhausted in relationships is often not the fact that they give too much. It is that they continue living in the hope that enough love, enough patience, or enough sacrifice will eventually transform someone else into the person they wish they could become. Yet it is precisely that attachment which quietly pulls the mind away from reality longer than almost anything else. Number 4. The belief that other people will become the person you expect them to be. Much of the suffering people experience begins with something that, at first glance, seems beautiful: the hope that someone they love will change. In the beginning, that hope often takes the form of patience. People believe that given enough time, enough sincerity, and enough compassion, the relationship will eventually become different. A man will eventually learn how to listen. A woman will eventually become less emotionally distant. A soul filled with turmoil will eventually mature after enduring enough hardship. And so, many people enter relationships not based on the reality before them, but upon a future version of the other person that they have quietly constructed within their imagination. The moment a person begins loving someone's potential more than their true nature, their entire inner world is pulled away from reality. They are no longer living with what actually exists. They are living with what they hope will eventually come into existence. Every conversation becomes a sign to be interpreted. Every small change becomes evidence that the other person is slowly becoming who they long for them to be. And the more emotional investment they place into that imagined future, the harder it becomes to accept the truth that some aspects of human nature cannot be transformed through love or patience alone. What makes this state so dangerous is not hope itself. Human beings do not collapse simply because they continue believing in something better. The problem begins when hope pulls the mind away from the reality unfolding before it and into an imagined version of life. One part of the person clearly sees the wounds, the fractures, and the truth that presents itself day after day. Yet another part continues clinging to the belief that everything will eventually change, that the other person will become different, that the relationship will somehow return to what it once was. Over time, the inner world becomes divided into two parallel realities, one belonging to what is actually happening, and another belonging to what they desperately wish life would become. Carl Jung understood this mechanism clearly when he spoke about projection. Human beings rarely see other people exactly as they are. More often, they see them through the veil of their own unmet psychological needs. Someone deprived of emotional security is likely to see another person as a potential safe haven. Someone carrying the wound of abandonment is more likely to believe that if they become important enough, the other person will eventually change and stay. The psyche no longer responds to the person standing before it. It responds to the meaning it has projected onto them. This is why some people remain trapped within relationships long after they have become emotionally exhausted. What keeps them there is often no longer love in its ordinary sense. It is their attachment to an imagined future. They cannot bear the thought that after investing so much emotionally, the other person may never become the person they believed they could be. And so their inner life remains suspended in an endless state of waiting. From that point onward, the inner world gradually loses its natural sense of lightness. Nothing exhausts the human mind more than continuously negotiating with reality. One part of the self longs to accept the truth. Another part struggles to force reality back into its old shape. That inner conflict creates an extraordinarily subtle form of depletion. It is not as dramatic as overwhelming heartbreak. It feels more like holding a heavy door shut with hands that have grown unbearably tired, while somewhere deep inside, you already know that the door has not led anywhere for a very long time. People often believe that what weighs them down is another person's behavior. Yet many times, what truly drains the spirit is the effort required to keep preserving a story that no longer matches reality. The inner world is stretched between what exists and what refuses to be released. A mind caught in that tension can rarely find genuine peace because it remains in a quiet but constant struggle against life itself. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This insight extends far beyond irritation in relationships. It points toward a deeper psychological truth. Many of the expectations we place upon others are reflections of unresolved needs within ourselves. The need to be seen, the need to be loved in the way we long for, the need to prove that old wounds can finally be healed through another human being. But no one can ever bring genuine peace to a mind that is still trying to force reality to conform to its desires. That is why letting go of the belief that someone else will eventually become the person we expect them to be is directly connected to raising the quality of our inner state. As long as we remain trapped within that waiting, our psychological energy stays under constant tension. The mind must continually observe, analyze, hope, become disappointed, and then hope once again. It resembles a river that can never follow its natural course because invisible dams of expectation continue blocking its flow. The moment a person truly releases that need, a remarkably quiet stillness begins to emerge. It is not emotional coldness, nor is it indifference. It is the state in which the inner world finally stops trying to force life into its own preferred design. People begin seeing others as they truly are, rather than as the versions they wish they would become. And it is this clarity that frees the mind from countless invisible forms of exhaustion accumulated over many years. A light soul is not one that has never hoped. It is one that has become mature enough not to anchor its entire emotional life to its expectations. Ultimately, living at a higher level of consciousness does not arise from gaining control over other people. It arises when the inner world stops resisting reality and finally learns to live in clarity, instead of clinging to imagined versions of life that it has held on to for far too long. And eventually, after countless moments of waiting, countless disappointments, and countless attempts to hold on to things that no longer belong to them, people find themselves face to face with the one thing they have been avoiding from the very beginning: emptiness. An emptiness where there is no one left to rescue, no one left to wait for, and no noise loud enough to drown out the quiet movements within themselves. It is there that the fear of being alone finally reveals its true form. Number 5. The fear of being alone. Nightfall is often the time when many people begin to feel uncomfortable with their own minds. It is no coincidence that so many people have the habit of turning something on before going to sleep. A short video, a podcast, a movie they have watched dozens of times. Sometimes even the sound of another person's voice somewhere in the room is enough to feel more comforting than complete silence. On the surface, this habit seems perfectly ordinary, but if we look more deeply, it reveals something worth reflecting upon. Modern people are gradually losing the ability to simply be with themselves, and from that very moment, the inner life begins drifting farther and farther away from the clear and light state that so many people describe as a higher vibration. What is remarkable is that most people are not truly afraid of solitude in the physical sense. They are not afraid of an empty room. They are afraid of what begins to emerge in their minds once every external noise disappears. A faint feeling of emptiness, a void that is difficult to name, a quiet exhaustion that they always manage to outrun during the day. That is why so many people remain almost constantly busy, not necessarily because life demands so much of them, but because constant activity keeps them from confronting what lies silently beneath the surface of consciousness. Over time, the mind becomes accustomed to always having something standing between itself and its own inner world, until even a few moments of silence begin to feel unbearable. Carl Jung believed that most people spend their entire lives without ever truly meeting themselves. They encounter their social roles. They encounter the versions of themselves that exist within relationships. They encounter other people's responses to them, but only rarely do they become quiet enough to reach the deeper layer beneath all of these things. Jung described this journey as the descent into the unconscious, where a person must walk through the inner darkness without the comforting noise of the collective to cling to. And it is precisely because people continually flee from that silence that so many never step into a way of living that is lighter and deeper. That is why solitude so often makes people feel profoundly uneasy. Silence has the power to reveal everything that a busy life usually keeps hidden. A man may feel perfectly fine while surrounded by work, friends, and social gatherings. Yet after only a few days alone, a deep sense of emptiness begins rising within him, like the tide. A woman may constantly keep herself occupied by taking care of everyone else, but the moment every conversation ends, her inner world suddenly feels like a house that no one has ever truly entered. And when the inner life remains in constant avoidance of itself, the mind struggles to find genuine stability at its deepest level. The fear of being alone, then, is not merely the desire for connection. More often, it is the fear of hearing the deepest movements of one's own soul. People often believe they need more sound in order to feel better, when what they truly lack is the ability to endure stillness without immediately running away from it. That is an enormous difference. A mind can never reach true depth if it instinctively fills every empty space the moment it appears. Just as constantly disturbed water can never reflect the true shape of the sky, the inner life also requires a certain degree of stillness before its deeper psychological layers begin revealing themselves. And it is within that stillness that the soul gradually frees itself from prolonged inner fragmentation, the very force that quietly lowers the quality of one's entire way of living. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Whoever looks outward dreams, whoever looks inward awakens." But looking inward has never been an entirely comfortable experience. It requires a person to pass through a very unusual state in which nothing remains to distract their attention from themselves. And for many people, that is precisely what feels most frightening. For it is in silence that the questions postponed for far too long begin returning. Am I truly living in a way that allows my soul to expand? Why do I feel farther away from myself the older I become? What is creating this deep exhaustion inside me, even though my outer life is not especially difficult? During the day, these questions are buried beneath schedules, work, and endless stimulation. But when night falls and the world begins slowing down, they return like soft knocks coming from the deepest chambers of the mind. That is why so many people cannot remain alone for very long before instinctively reaching for their phones. These devices do far more than provide entertainment. They also offer one of the fastest forms of psychological escape. With only a few taps, people can leave their own inner world and immerse themselves in the voices, emotions, and lives of hundreds of others. Over time, they gradually lose the ability to remain still long enough to sense the subtle movements unfolding within their own souls. And a mind that is constantly being pulled outward in this way finds it incredibly difficult to maintain genuine clarity and deep inner balance. Yet here lies the paradox. The very thing people spend their lives trying to avoid is often the doorway leading toward their deepest growth. A seed cannot take root in soil that is constantly being disturbed. It must remain quietly in darkness long enough before it can begin to germinate. The inner life follows exactly the same principle. Our deepest transformations rarely occur within crowds, and they certainly do not emerge amid the endless stimulation of modern life. They arise within moments of profound solitude, where people slowly begin hearing the true rhythm of their own being after years of living surrounded by far too much noise. Many people discover this only after circumstances force them away from the familiar world they once knew. A breakup, a move to another city, a period of separation from old relationships. At first, solitude often feels cold and empty. But if they resist the urge to fill that emptiness immediately, something entirely different begins to emerge: the ability to remain with themselves without fear. And that is precisely when their way of living begins changing from within, becoming deeper, lighter, and more stable. Not because life has suddenly become perfect, but because for the first time in many years, the soul is no longer forced to spend so much of its energy running away from itself. By now, perhaps you already recognize the 5 things you need to let go of today in order to raise your vibrational frequency. Yet, releasing these 5 invisible anchors has never been a loss. It is a profound liberation of the soul. It is the moment you find the courage to remove the shell that has become far too tight and worn. Step beyond the boundaries of your comfort zone and return yourself to the original frequency of freedom. This journey does not unfold like a dazzling miracle that appears overnight. It is a quiet and gentle shift that takes place through every conscious breath. As you begin letting go and clearing the inner space within you, the world around you naturally begins responding with an entirely different melody. Sometimes the elevation of consciousness does not arrive through dramatic life-changing events. It hides within the smallest transformations of everyday life. When you suddenly realize that the way you look at a flower, listen to the voice within, or face adversity is no longer the same as before, revealing that a new current of energy has finally begun flowing through your life. Part 5. Signs that your vibrational frequency is changing. At this point, I would like to invite you to observe yourself in a very different way. Do not rush to ask whether you have already reached a higher vibrational frequency. That question often arises from the impatience of the ego, while the deepest transformations of the soul unfold quietly, almost without making a sound. A tree cannot hear the sound of its own roots growing beneath the earth. Yet the entire forest knows that spring is arriving when the first buds begin to emerge. The human inner world follows the same principle. Long before the outer world recognizes any change, the unconscious has already begun silently rearranging the entire order within. That is why the first sign of transformation does not lie in accomplishing something extraordinary, but in the way you begin to experience life from an entirely different level of consciousness. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. This statement is not only about the journey of self-awareness. It also reflects the transformation of one's inner vibration. As consciousness gradually turns inward, psychological energy is no longer scattered by endless external stimulation. The first thing that changes is not your circumstances. It is the one who is observing those circumstances. One of the clearest signs that your vibrational frequency is beginning to change is the sense of calm you feel toward things that once triggered intense emotional reactions. In the past, a single criticism could leave your mind spinning for days. A distant glance from someone could generate countless negative assumptions. Now, similar situations still occur, but they no longer create great waves within your inner world. This does not mean you have become indifferent or emotionally numb. On the contrary, you still experience your emotions fully. The difference is that your emotions no longer dominate your awareness. Like a lake after a storm, the surface may still ripple beneath the wind, but the depths remain undisturbed. From Jung's perspective, this is a sign that the ego is no longer reacting to old complexes with the same intensity as before. The energy once trapped in defensive patterns is gradually returning to support the development of the self. Many studies in modern psychology have observed a similar phenomenon from a different perspective. As people gradually develop greater emotional regulation, the nervous system no longer reacts excessively to familiar signals of threat. Experiences that once immediately activated defensive responses begin to be processed by the regions of the brain responsible for evaluation and reflection, rather than being driven entirely by survival instincts. This does not eliminate emotion. Instead, it transforms a person's relationship with their emotions. Carl Jung described this process through the language of analytical psychology. The energy once held captive by psychological complexes is gradually being released to serve the maturation of the self. Although these are two different frameworks, they converge on the same essential truth. Inner strength increases when instinctive reactions no longer dominate the entire psychological life. Another shift that often confuses people is the change in the standards by which they evaluate life. Things that once filled you with excitement suddenly seem less compelling. The pursuit of status, recognition, or praise no longer carries the same appeal. Those around you may assume that you have lost your ambition, when in reality, the opposite is true. Your motivation remains, but its source has changed. Before, you acted to fill an inner emptiness. Now you act because what you are doing genuinely reflects your true nature. Like a river that has finally found its way to the sea, it no longer needs to prove its strength by crashing against every cliff along its course. It simply continues to flow in the direction that nature has already opened before it. As the need to prove yourself gradually fades, your vibrational frequency shifts from a state of lack to a state of wholeness. You will also begin to notice something remarkable. Silence no longer feels frightening. Many people constantly fill every quiet moment with their phones, music, social media, or endless conversations because they fear hearing the voice rising from within themselves. Yet, as transformation unfolds, silence becomes a place where energy is restored. You begin to appreciate unhurried mornings, long walks without headphones, or a few quiet moments sitting beside a window. Stillness no longer feels empty. Instead, it resembles fertile soil quietly nourishing the seeds beneath its surface. It is within these moments of silence that intuition becomes clearer, thoughts become less chaotic, and many important decisions emerge with astonishing clarity. Another sign that often goes unnoticed appears in the way you see other people. In the past, you may have been easily drawn into deciding who was right and who was wrong, who deserved your affection, and who should be avoided. As your consciousness expands, you still know how to establish healthy boundaries, but you no longer waste so much energy judging others. You begin to recognize that every person acts from the level of consciousness they currently possess. Those who live in fear create fear. Those who carry deep wounds unconsciously spread those wounds to others. This understanding does not mean accepting harmful behavior. Rather, it frees your heart from the burden of resentment. Instead of holding the fire of anger in your own hands while preparing to throw it at someone else, you choose to let it go before it burns you first. This transformation also reveals itself in the way you respond to unexpected hardships. Life still brings loss, failure, and unfinished plans. The difference is that you no longer interpret every setback as evidence that life is working against you. Instead, you begin asking what within you is being invited to grow through this experience. That shift in perspective transforms adversity from an enemy into a teacher. Just as a mountain climber understands that the steep slope exists not to stop the ascent, but to lead them higher, you gradually realize that many of the challenges that once caused you pain have actually become the force driving your psychological growth. When meaning changes, the energy generated by experience changes as well. What makes this stage especially meaningful is that you become far less concerned with how far you have progressed along your path. The ego constantly wants to measure, compare, and confirm that it is advancing faster than everyone else. The self operates in an entirely different way. It competes with no one because it understands that every soul follows its own rhythm of growth, just as a forest never demands that every tree blossom on the same day. Inner development does not obey society's clock. You stop forcing yourself to become a perfect version of yourself, and instead learn to grow each day with profound patience. Ultimately, the greatest sign that your vibrational frequency is changing is not a prolonged state of euphoria or a series of mystical experiences. It is that life gradually begins to feel more authentic. You no longer need countless masks in order to be accepted. You no longer feel compelled to convince everyone to understand you. You no longer trade your inner peace for a few fleeting moments of approval. Each decision begins to reflect what your inner being truly believes rather than your fear of rejection. This is also the moment when the distance between the persona and the self gradually narrows, when the person you present to the world becomes increasingly aligned with the person you truly are. In Carl Jung's thought, this is not the final destination, but a sign that the process of individuation is unfolding in the right direction. A high vibrational frequency, in the deepest sense, is not some mystical level of energy existent outside yourself. It is the state in which your entire psychological life gradually returns to harmony with your authentic nature. When that happens, the world remains the same world, but the one walking through it is no longer the same person they were yesterday. Across many ancient spiritual traditions, the journey of expanding consciousness has never been described as climbing a radiant staircase toward enlightenment. Instead, it resembles a pilgrimage into the depths of a sacred forest. The hero of Greek mythology must descend into the underworld before reclaiming the light. Medieval alchemists called this stage nigredo, the dark night of dissolution, where every old form breaks apart in preparation for rebirth. Buddhism likens the process to a muddy lake settling into stillness. As the sediment sinks, the surface naturally begins to reflect the sky. Although each tradition speaks in a different language, they all point toward the same universal principle. Enduring light does not appear after we accumulate more. It appears only after we find the courage to release what no longer belongs to our truest nature. This is also the spirit that runs throughout the entire journey of individuation, a journey Carl Jung devoted his life to exploring. As the sediment of illusion and external pressure gradually settles, as the antenna of your soul begins to resonate with the first clear frequencies of inner freedom, you will realize that awakening is not a destination to be admired from afar. It is a way of living that must be nurtured every single day. The tender shoots of awareness emerging from the soil of the unconscious require deliberate acts of consciousness to nourish and shape them. Energy cannot sustain itself through theory alone. It calls for commitment, for a gentle yet unwavering discipline of transformation, expressed through the smallest choices of everyday life, where the subtle changes taking place within you are slowly embodied as a living reality, grounded and resilient before every storm. Part 6. Practicing a higher state of consciousness. True transformation of the inner life rarely begins with grand decisions. Most of the time, it emerges through very small changes in the way we relate to our own inner world each day. Carl Jung understood this deeply. The soul does not function like a machine that can be repaired through willpower or positive thinking. It resembles a forest. If it has been trampled for too long, it needs time to allow life to grow back according to its own rhythm. That is why many of the practices capable of transforming our psychological state most profoundly are often so simple that they are easily overlooked. One of the first changes begins with learning to stop answering too quickly, "I'm fine," when your inner world is anything but fine. Adults often become accustomed to making everything appear stable in front of others. They learn to smile at the appropriate moments, fulfill their responsibilities, and move through exhausting days with an almost automatic calmness. Yet the inner life does not disappear simply because it is ignored. It merely retreats deeper beneath consciousness, quietly creating a persistent heaviness that we ourselves often cannot explain. There are days when your inner world does not need more motivation. It simply needs one honest moment with yourself, a moment to admit that you are tired, that something is genuinely troubling you, that there are places where you no longer wish to keep forcing yourself to fit. Jung believed that whatever we deny continues to control us through the unconscious. Sometimes, simply naming your emotions accurately becomes the first step toward releasing your inner world from a state of tension it has carried for far too long. Another practice that appears almost insignificant, yet has the power to reshape the psyche more deeply than many realize, is writing down what you are feeling. Not to write beautifully, not to transform emotion into philosophy, simply to place your inner movements onto paper instead of carrying them endlessly inside your mind. Some thoughts remain nothing more than an indistinct fog as long as they stay trapped within the mind. But once they are written down, you begin to see more clearly what is truly weighing upon your heart. Sometimes, only a few brief lines before going to sleep are enough. A sentence about something that disturbed you during the day, a feeling you cannot explain to anyone else, a small disappointment that keeps repeating itself. What matters is not finding an immediate solution. The moment your inner world is no longer forced into silence, transformation has already begun. Jung devoted a great deal of time to silence because he understood that the inner life requires space to restore its own balance. Yet modern life has almost completely stripped people of the ability to remain quietly with themselves. They wake up surrounded by noise, spend their days immersed in noise, and fall asleep within noise. Their minds are constantly pulled outward by information, reactions, and endless stimulation. Eventually, many people can no longer distinguish the true voice of their own inner world. For this reason, try giving yourself a brief period each day without attempting to fill it with anything at all. No phone, no music, no effort to keep your mind occupied. It might simply be 10 quiet minutes sitting beside a window in the morning, a walk without headphones, an evening when you turn off every screen earlier than usual and sit quietly within your own room. At first, this silence will likely feel uncomfortable, but if you remain with that initial restlessness, you may begin to realize that your inner world has gone far too long without breathing in genuine peace. Eventually, there comes a time when you must look honestly at the relationships that have been quietly draining your energy. What weighs upon the spirit is often not a dramatic event, but the persistent feeling of having to make yourself smaller, simply to preserve harmony somewhere for far too long. There are conversations that leave your inner world more exhausted than before they began. There are relationships that are not obviously toxic, yet your soul must remain constantly tense just to exist within them. Many people fear saying no because they mistake endurance for kindness. They continue showing up in places that leave them emotionally depleted simply to avoid feeling guilty. But Jung understood that anything forcing us to continually abandon our authentic nature will eventually create fragmentation within the psyche. Sometimes, one of the deepest acts of healing is simply allowing yourself to stop remaining where your inner life continually contracts. Ultimately, vibrating at a higher level of consciousness has never meant existing in a constant state of excitement, as many people imagine. It does not make anyone more special than anyone else. If you look deeply enough, it is simply the state in which your inner world finally begins moving according to its own natural rhythm. It is the state where you no longer have to spend so much energy fighting against yourself. Perhaps true lightness of the soul has always begun there. In the end, every healing practice, every effort to change, and every act of letting go is not truly leading us toward becoming a higher version of ourselves in the way the world often describes it. If we look deeply enough, all of these paths are quietly guiding the inner world back to something ancient yet profoundly real. The state of simply existing as ourselves without being torn in countless different directions. This is also the place Jung gave the deepest journey of psychological life its name, Individuation. Part 7. Individuation, the ultimate destination of a higher vibrational frequency. At a certain point in life, people begin to experience a form of change that is quiet yet profoundly transformative. The things that once stirred intense desire within them no longer hold the same magnetic pull. Competitions that once seemed important gradually become exhausting. The need to constantly prove their worth quietly begins to fade, not because they have lost their motivation for life, but because the psyche is gradually shifting away from the need to become someone and moving closer to the need to simply exist as who they truly are. At first glance, this state is easily mistaken for passivity or withdrawal from the world. Yet, through Carl Jung's perspective, it is often a sign that the inner world is entering a process of maturation far deeper than the visible changes taking place in one's external life. Jung called this process individuation. What is essential to understand, however, is that individuation is not a journey that makes a person more special than anyone else. Nor is it the process of constructing a stronger ego in order to stand out from the crowd. Rather, it is the journey through which the quiet conflicts within gradually become visible, allowing the psyche to free itself from being pulled in too many different directions at once. Most people live for years in a state of inner fragmentation without ever recognizing it. One part longs for freedom, while another fears losing the comfort of familiarity. One part wants to slow down, while another remains driven by the relentless pace of the collective. One part yearns for depth, while another is constantly pulled toward the endless distractions of the modern world. When these opposing currents coexist for too long, the inner life begins to experience an almost imperceptible tension. On the surface, everything may appear stable, yet underneath there is a persistent feeling that enormous psychological energy is being consumed simply to prevent everything from falling apart. This is the kind of exhaustion that ordinary rest can rarely reach. It is not exactly intense suffering, nor is it complete emptiness. It resembles the feeling of someone who has wandered far away from their own natural rhythm, yet continues walking because they no longer know where to begin the journey back. What is striking is that most people only recognize this inner division after enduring a long period of emotional exhaustion. Before then, they usually believe the problem lies in their work, external pressures, or their environment. But as they mature, they gradually realize that the deepest burden does not come from external circumstances. It comes from a mind forced to exist within constant inner contradictions without ever finding a true center to which it can return. This is precisely why Jung regarded individuation as the deepest destination of psychological maturity. He once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Yet becoming yourself, in the Jungian sense, has never meant discovering some idealized version of who you could be. It is the gradual process of removing the countless layers of identification that have covered the inner life for far too long. Ambitions absorbed from the collective, fears shaped by the need to be accepted, psychological reflexes that keep a person endlessly chasing something in order to feel worthy. What is remarkable is that the further people move along the path of individuation, the less obsessed they become with how they appear in the eyes of the world. Not because they lose their ability to connect with society, but because the center of gravity within their lives begins to shift from the outside inward. A subtle transformation takes place. Instead of constantly asking, "What do other people think of me?" the inner world begins asking, "Does this truly resonate with the deepest part of who I am?" That quiet shift changes the entire way a person moves through life. The deepest parts of the ocean remain calmer than the waters near the shore, not because they are motionless, but because the currents beneath are vast enough that every passing wind on the surface can no longer disturb them. A mature psychological life functions in much the same way. People do not become emotionally numb when they enter the process of individuation. They still experience pain. They still feel uncertainty. They still pass through periods of confusion like everyone else. Yet beneath all of that, their inner world is no longer completely carried away by every passing disturbance. A single criticism no longer has the power to make them lose themselves for days. A rejection no longer immediately awakens the need to prove their worth. Even silence and solitude begin to take on an entirely different meaning. They are no longer signs of lack. They become spaces where the mind quietly returns to itself. That which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. Jung's insight captures the very essence of individuation. Whatever remains unconscious continues shaping our lives from beneath awareness, repeating itself as though it were destiny. The same emotional reactions, the same patterns of suffering, the same choices that gradually drain the vitality of the soul. Only when we become courageous enough to look deeply into the true structure of our inner world without immediately turning away, does life begin to change at its roots. For this reason, the ultimate destination of a higher vibrational frequency has never been a permanent state of emotional exhilaration. It is not a condition of being endlessly positive or peaceful. From the Jungian perspective, it is the gradual unification of the inner world, a state in which thoughts, emotions, and the rhythm of life no longer move as opposing currents, a state in which a person no longer lives in prolonged fragmentation, but begins to exist as an integrated whole. A symphony becomes truly profound only when every instrument finally joins the same composition, instead of competing to be heard above the others. The human psyche follows the same principle. The deepest peace does not appear when all chaos disappears. It appears when the different parts within finally discover how to coexist without continuing to collide in the darkness. From that inner unity, an entirely different way of being gradually emerges. It is neither loud nor hurried. It is no longer driven by the overwhelming need to prove anything to the world. It is the state in which the inner life finally rediscovers its own true axis, where a person no longer has to become someone else in order to feel worthy of existing. The inner life has never been like climbing a mountain where carrying more baggage brings you closer to the summit. It is more like a still lake. Each time we stir our inner world with too many expectations, too many methods, too many efforts to become a higher version of ourselves, the surface becomes less capable of reflecting the sky. Eventually, what the soul truly needs is no longer another answer, but the removal of the noise that has concealed its true nature for far too long. Carl Jung once wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. Wholeness does not arise when we preserve only the parts of ourselves we admire while trying to eliminate everything we perceive as dark. It emerges when light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, success and failure all find their rightful place within the same psychological life." From this perspective, a high vibrational state has never been a reward reserved for those who are more perfect than others. It is the natural consequence of an inner life that has stopped dividing itself and has begun functioning as an integrated whole. If there is one thing worth carrying with you after this video, I hope it is not another new concept or yet another method to apply tomorrow. A single quiet question is enough. What within me is still so heavy that my soul cannot breathe freely? For many of life's greatest transformations do not begin on the day we learn something new. They begin on the day we find the courage to release what has already fulfilled its purpose. And when that happens, there is no need to struggle to raise your vibrational frequency anymore. It changes naturally, the way a forest renews itself after a wildfire, or the way a lake reflects the sky once its final ripples have settled. And if conversations like this help you look more deeply into yourself, rather than only outward at the world, I invite you to subscribe and join me on the journeys ahead. Each video will open another doorway into the unconscious, into the archetypes, and into the process of individuation that Carl Jung devoted his entire life to exploring. Perhaps and again to understand yourself a little more deeply each time,